I'm going to come out bluntly and say this, Chris, and I'm sure it's going to offend some people, but finance is just not important. It's just not important, right? Because the business was not created for finance or FP&A. Finance was created because there's a business to run, right?
Nice. Good afternoon, good morning, good evening. My name is Chris Ortega, and I'm the FP&A consultant here at Collectiv. And I'm so excited today to have Collectiv Conversations. We have Andres Liu-Lindberg from the Business Partnership Institute. Really excited to talk with him today. He's a leader in thought leadership, anything FP&A, anything business processing, anything business partnership. The Business Partnership Institution and his organization does a tremendous job in thought leadership, consulting work, and all different kind of things to help support the accounting, finance, and FP&A community. So I'm really excited today. I'm looking forward to having you here. Thank you. Welcome to the show, Andres.
Thanks, Chris. Thanks for having me and looking forward to the conversation.
Sweet. So one thing I always like to kick it off with people, right? We're coming out of the pandemic, right? FP&A, and this is our moment of fame, right? This is our 15 minutes of fame. This is our spotlight. We're helping guide organizations through where it's like a phase, right? Like we were hibernating, we were buckled down, all the revenue, all the marketing people were like, FP&A, finance, you guys are in the front center, carry us through this, right? And now we're re-emerging. Things are opening back up. People are starting to travel. Budgets are changing. People are going to marketing shows. All these things are changing right now. So my first question I always like to ask guests to just kick it off is, what is like how you see FP&A before and after the pandemic, and how is that changing and changing industries and changing organizations as we look forward to the future?
So you can say that FP&A, the pandemic hasn't changed FP&A per se. It's more that the pandemic gave FP&A a spotlight for showing what we can do or maybe cannot do, depending on where your FP&A team is today. But the basics of FP&A still remain the same. We just need to become better at it, right? So I published an ebook on FP&A last year, really just saying, what's the mission of FP&A? It's to drive the right strategic choices in the company. And by all means, that mission remains. And the challenge now, of course, is that we don't have the natural spotlight anymore, right? There's no one that says, hey, FP&A, save us. It's like, okay, thank you, FP&A. Now we're going to move on with our business, right? So how is FP&A going to remain relevant? I think that's the key question, right? And we can only remain relevant if we add value, if we, come in with new perspectives, challenge our stakeholders, and make them or help them make better decisions. And we were supposed to do that before the pandemic, and we should continue to do that after the pandemic. So I won't call the pandemic a blip in that sense, but it just gave us a spotlight for a moment, and we have to make sure that we can also thrive without the natural spotlight.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's the challenge, right? And like you said, it's like we had that moment, and you articulated it so well when you said that, hey, come save us. And now that people are the saved, it's like, in business, man, it's like it's always that running curve of like, what are you going to do for me right now? And it's like, I think it's so important to that relevance issue, right? Because we did. I know from just in the trenches of what I was at the organization, what we're continuing to do, like, we're continuing to harp in like, hey, we did the strategic planning. We moved from static-based modeling to more agile, right? We were more empathetic in terms of our decision-making processes. Like, we have all these different things, but when now the business is starting to course correct to say, okay, we're going to try to get back to some of those older things that we were doing. How are we making sure to steer the ship to keep our value proposition extremely relevant, right? Because I mean, I don't want us FP&A and what we went through to be the one-hit wonders in organizations, right? Like you have that song that comes out, everybody loves it, and then like a year later, nobody remembers it, right? So let's dive deeper into that relevancy piece. So if you were to guide someone and say, okay, these are the projects, these are the skill sets, these are the situations that you should be involved in to keep yourself relevant, to keep that value proposition strong from where we had during the pandemic And afterwards, what would be some of your recommendations?
So I think the key starting point is always to know what are the key priorities of our business or the key stakeholders that we support. And of course, the key priorities today are different from what they were a year ago. You said, go back to the old ways, and I'm not even sure there is like a old way to go back to say that the three priorities that are important today are the same as 2 years ago in 2019. But there's always three priorities that are important, and I think those are the ones that we should zoom in on and say, you know what, if you're the chief sales officer, chief commercial officer, or chief operations officer, whatever you are, we're supposed to support you to make the best possible choices. Now let's talk about what your key priorities are and how we help you be successful there. Because I think if you can do that well, you will always be relevant. But we ran a poll some a month back or something like that in a webinar that I was a part of, and I think we had maybe 600 FP&A practitioners on there, and I think it was half or even more that didn't know the key priorities of their stakeholders.
Wow.
And if you're in that situation, no wonder you're just out when the spotlight is gone, right? I mean, it's so simple, yet we don't do it. Then we get caught up in the next planning or budgeting cycle or forecasting or doing some finance analysis. I mean, we have to focus on the right priorities, and those are the priorities of business, not something that we dream up or whatever, right? So that's the key point, Chris.
Yeah, and I think that's a typical fallacy and a failure that that I see in a lot of accounting, finance, FP&A teams. Man, they don't take that step. They don't slow down to get that survey. They're really just like, okay, this is the direction we need to go. We need to go this direction, and you marshal all the resources, all the commitments. You go this direction, and nobody takes a step back and be like, hey, like, is this the right direction we should be going? Is everybody on the page with us? Like, is everybody in the car with us going in this direction? Or do we just want to go to, this place, and we just made up this place because we thought it's the right thing to do? That's so important. And I think organizations and really strong FP&A teams have really taken, and my approach is like, I've always taken like pulsing inside the business, right? So I don't just like you work with me in a project, or we work together, and then like 3 months later you're like, oh yeah, I got to go work with that finance guy again. Like, I'm constantly like pulsing with my stakeholders. And to me, I think that's a really good way of getting a sense of where people are at, right? So like a pulse that I'm getting right now from our sales and marketing group, leading a global software company right now from a FP&A finance perspective, is they're like, I can tell that they want to get this urgency of getting back to like being client facing, being in front of people, getting back to prospecting, getting back to normal sales and marketing activities, right? But I'm also with it because it's like, hey, like, I understand that and this is what I want to dive in a little deeper, because sometimes those priorities that the business wants to do are not prioritized in the models that we've created, right? So you get this disconnect because the business wants to do this, but we've already said our plans. Travel is a great example of this. I don't know what CFO right now has not reduced their travel like to $0, right? But then you got the business that's coming to you and saying, hey, Chris, this is a priority for us to get to prospecting. We need to get in front of clients. Clients are now starting to want us to be in front of them. They want to come to our offices. They want to do this stuff. So how do you, as a finance person, when you got that competing priority from the business, but that financial piece of it in your modeling and your assumptions that you've made, you've got that disconnect. It's like that push-pull. How would you recommend someone to like challenge that priority with that stakeholder, but that is not aligned to the financial models or the directive that's been given?
So I'm going to come out bluntly and say this, Chris, and I'm sure it's going to offend some people, but finance is just not important. It's just not important, right? Because the business was not created for finance or FP&A. Finance was created because there's a business to run, right?
Nice.
So,
nice.
I mean, yes, you have a model, right? And maybe it's a big monster, maybe it's even in Excel, and it's probably difficult to change and whatnot. But honestly, no one outside that finance cubicle cares, right? They're doing business out there. And you talked about, pulsing with the business and so on. I'm like, you should be out there, not sitting in here. And I speak to many business leaders as well, or business senior executives, and when I ask them, so what's a good business partner, or when does it work? And one of the key things they say, it's always in the top three, is when they sit with us. It's when they're there with us, right? Because if you sit in the finance office on the fourth floor, day in, day out, and the business is going on the second floor, I mean, you're out of it. You're completely out of it, right? So, go live with the customer, go live with the business, be there with them. They have the important priorities. I'm sorry to say, but we in finance, we do not, unless the business is about to go bankrupt and we're putting FP&A in the spotlight because you need to save us, like it could be during the pandemic, right? But you do not want finance to be calling the shots in the business. That means you're in trouble, right? So finance is not important. I'm sorry to say, it's a lagging outcome of things happening in the business. So let's get out there and lead the pack together with the business leaders, right?
Dude, I love it. The reason why I love that is because I think too many times people get caught up in, and I'm just like, look, I struggle with this, man. I listen to all those listeners and everybody looking at this. I will tell you, it's not just an anomaly. It's not that you're sitting back as like, who else is not struggling? This is a common struggle, right? And you knocked it out the park, right? Finance does not drive the business, right? We should support the business initiatives, right? So there's always, and I think one thing that has come from the pandemic for me is we cannot get back as finance, FP&A, to get back to our rigid static modeling that we do to say, here's the baseline and here's where you can't go above, right? There's going to be so many changes. And think about it, like we had to be so fluid during this situation that we were just like water, man. It wasn't like a stream that was like, okay, I know this stream is going to go 5 miles an hour. It's going to go north, and that's where it's going to go. It's going to stay 5 miles an hour for the next 12 months. I looked at it. That's what it's going to be. It was like this thing was ever turning. And your analogy, finance doesn't drive the business. The business should drive the finance. And that gets to a fundamental piece of like, where I think a lot of FP&A people struggle is that they're finance people first and they're business people third or fourth on their list, right? And that gets to my next question I want to ask you. When you look at an FP&A professional to say, okay, how do I move from being this finance, really data person and really rigid from a business perspective and say, you know what, it's over $100 for your meal, so we can't approve it. It's not within the policy. How do you move from that kind of mindset when you have priorities in the business that are competing, but they're the right things to do, right? How do you balance to say, okay, I need to get out of this mindset and I need to shift to this more business partnering, more, valued advisor inside the business? What are some like tactics or skills that you think are helpful for FP&A people to make that shift?
So I think, it all starts with a personal choice to actually wanting to do it, right? Because, and I'm going to just come out straight and say it as well. It's uncomfortable out there. It is, right? Because it's outside your comfort zone of the finance cubicle and the static models. And I know we are stereotyping here a bit, and sorry to all the folks out there feeling a bit hit by this one, right? But it is uncomfortable out there. And, so you can also decide to just be in that bubble, and you'll be called upon from time to time, and you'll be reporting on some monthly numbers. It's probably not a very fulfilling work life, but there is a work life there. So some people, they prefer that, and that's also fine. But you make a personal choice to step out there outside the comfort zone, where you don't know everything that's going on, and you will have lots of questions, and that's fine. And you won't be able to contribute with a ton of value from day one. Go out there, listen and learn how business is conducted, and then you'll start to feel more comfortable. And then the second bit is, there are simple tools and tips that you can use to get out there. So for instance, I talked before about knowing the key priorities of your stakeholders. Well, just take a simple table and say, who are my stakeholders? What's my current relationship with them? Do they trust me? Have I done good work with them? So are they happy with what I'm doing for them? And so on and so forth. So you figure out who are the important stakeholders. And when you have listed them, then book them for a coffee or meeting and say, hey, I'm trying something new here, and I really want to support you achieving your goals. So can we have a conversation around, how's the business going for you, and what are some of your priorities you're working on? And we know this, both of us. People like to talk about what they do, so of course they will. Right? When you come with a humble, open approach, of course they will. So they talk about their business, how it's going, their priorities, and you're like, man, I want to help you, right? So, let me take this back to my desk and let me give it some thought, and I look at some numbers, and then I'll come back to you, and I'm going to come with some suggestions of how I can help you. I might not have the greatest recommendation since sliced bread, but I'm going to have something for you, and let's discuss. Right? That's what it is. Right? It sounds so simple, and it is. Right? But you have to step outside that comfort zone and follow those simple steps, right? And that's just one example. And of course, for many things you want to do in business partnering, there are similar simple examples, because business partnering is simple, but we have to recognize it's hard to do because it's outside of comfort zone, and we have to make the personal choice to go there.
Yeah, that business partnership is it's a big leap for people, right? And I agree with you 100%. I am always pushing people to be outside the comfort zone, because literally outside your comfort zone is where you grow the most, you learn the most about yourself. You're just more, I think you're more heightened, right? And when I go back and look at business partnership and some of the ones that I've succeeded at and some of the ones I extremely failed at, to me, business partnership, like any relationship, is built on two core competencies of a relationship: trust and competency, right? And typically the fundamental fallacy that a lot of accounting, finance, FP&A teams make when they go about building that business partnership, building that relationship, they go straight to the competency, right? They go straight to the numbers. They go straight to the budgets. Well, yeah, I just, I'm having a meeting with you because I want to review where you're at tracking the budget, and you're a little bit over. Already right there, three things. You've already fit the stereotype of an accounting finance person. You're already in your comfort zone. And the third one, which is the most important one, you've already got that business on the defense now, right? Like, you're going to walk in that conversation, it's going to be guns blazing. You know what I mean? It's not going to be like, but to your approach that you said, get outside that comfort zone. And to your second point, get some time, understand, right? Like, take a step back. And for me, to all the listeners, one thing that I always love to do, I mean, I have one even after this, is I schedule leaders meetings and I have 30-minute meetings with them. I just sit back and listen. I don't come with solutions. I don't come with an agenda. When I tell them what the purpose of the meeting and the goal of it is, it says, look, I'm coming to talk with you. I want to understand the strengths that you see in the business, some opportunities, some risks that you see, some priorities that you're working on, and how I can best serve and support you around those things. And my objective in the meeting is to sit back and listen to you. A lot of times, and you said, it's not rocket science. A lot of the first step you got to do is be willing to sit back and listen, not listen to propose a solution, but listen to deeply understand that stakeholder, right? To me, like, that is how you build the trust, right? You can build it in that way. It's like, now Chris is looked at, or that FP&A person is looked at, to say, they're not just my finance person, right? They're my advisor. And the holy grail that you want to get to is saying that there's not a business decision that's made in my organization, sales, marketing, success, customer support, that I don't involve my finance partner. That is like, boom, you've achieved it. So for all the listeners, if you can talk to your stakeholders and they say that, you've knocked it out the park. But again, it's that uncomfortable zone, right? And I want to really expand on that, right? Because I think that uncomfortable zone and challenge, it's challenging new skill sets, right? It's challenging what a FP&A person of the future is going to be valued against, right? Like, when you think about FP&A and like getting outside of that comfort zone, right? Business partnership is one of them, but what are some of those other areas or the other skill sets that are non-traditional finance that really top talented, high performance, high partnership FP&A teams and organizations and people should be focused on? What are those other uncomfortable zones that people should be exploring?
So, I mean, we try to stay within the business partnering, which I also think makes a lot of sense also for FP&A. I mean, there are four key buckets. And, the first bucket is analytical skills, which is one where FP&A professionals should feel comfortable. But if we double click on that one, we talk about analytics, right? So it's not just analysis in Excel or your financial model. It is, analytics to be predictive, prescriptive. We know all the buzzwords, but do you actually know how to do it?
Yes.
Probably not, right? The second is problem solving. Do you have the consultant's toolbox to go out to any kind of business leader and say, okay, let's talk about that challenge we discussed 2 weeks ago. It's clearly a complex business issue you're facing here, so we cannot just brainstorm simply and then we have a solution. Let's sit down and look at how we're going to do this. Can you do that? I think few FP&A professionals can. And the last bit is, whether we then say lean or Six Sigma or something like that, but you have to have sort of like a toolbox you can bring out and say, how are we going to continue to optimize this business here, right? So yes, we say analytical skills, but as you can see, it goes a lot broader than what you would term as classical analytical skills. So that's just one bucket, right? Then we talk about business skill, business model, business strategy, commercial acumen. Do you actually understand how money is made, or do you just look at the P&L? Right? Because it's two different things, or the cash flow for that matter, right? But it's two different things. So that's the second. The third is leadership, right? You might not be a people leader, but there's still leadership of self, right? We talked about going outside the comfort zone. That requires significant personal leadership, right? Do you know what excites you? Do you know what you find very challenging? Do you have tools and tactics you can use when you are excited to get the most out of it? And when you are concerned or afraid, how do you tackle it? Do you have those things, right? Change, leading change. It's a change journey we're on, right? All the time. Businesses are on change journeys. We as professionals are FP&As on a change journey, right? So can you lead change? Can you go through the normal steps of change or not? And then, of course, there's the people leadership as well, right? Because leading FP&A professionals today is not what it was 5 or 10 years ago, at least not in a broad term. Because now it happens together with other people. It doesn't happen in a system or a checklist, right? So you have to go out there and experience your people in action. How are they collaborating with people? What's their relationship with their key stakeholders? How do they facilitate the meeting, right? Because there's a big difference in saying, I was in the meeting, right, but were you taking a back seat or were you up there on the screen facilitating, right? It's two different things. So that's the leadership bit. And then we come to the partnering aspect, right? Which is communication, influencing, and relationship building, right? Maybe the most difficult things, although the others they are hard as well, but the most difficult things for many finance and accounting professionals, right? Because it's, I ran a poll the other day on LinkedIn. I think we had 1,000 people replying to it. And I asked, so why did you go into finance? And 55% said, because I'm good with numbers. 12% said, because I'm good with people. So, I wouldn't expect people to say because they're good with people, but it just says we're probably not good with people, and now we have to be good with people. So, damn, man, it's rough out there, but it's also exciting when it succeeds, right?
Yeah, man, that list right there is gold. Like that's a fire moment right there. And analytical skills, problem solving, the toolbox to optimize processes, business and commercial acumen and understanding. Like your analogy where you said, do you know the P&L or do you really know how you make money? Like that's game changer. Like that, I mean, there's so many people that are like, and there's like, the sad thing is, Andres, there's like VPs of finance and there's CFOs that I know that don't know their business. And I'm like, how could you be you're the top person, and how do you not know like how they drive a marketing opportunity, right? Like that's like, how do you not know that, right? And then the change management and the people aspect of it, like that checklist that you mentioned out again. The reason why I love that so much is none of that you said in there is like, you have to know IFRS, you have to know US GAAP, you have to know ASC 606, you have to know IFRS 15, you have to be the best spreadsheet person, you got to know macros. It was like, no, what is so important about this skill set, and what I think is the challenge, and I think this is the fundamental piece of it, where in academia did we take business partnership 101? Like, I know when I went to college, right? When I went to college, I didn't take a business partnership class, right? I didn't take a class to deeply understand organizations, right? I didn't take a class on people leadership, right? So all these things that we're talking about, these are things that through normal academia and educational systems, you're just going to get on the job, right? Like you, and a lot of times I think people are just like, Chris, I can go take a class to learn how to be a people manager. I can go take a class to develop my analytical skills, which I think are great kind of fundamental basis. But 80% of anything you're going to learn is always going to be on the job. And you've got to take that leap of faith, right? And yes, we are asking accounting and finance people, get outside of your cave, get outside of your calculators, go communicate, go collaborate, go connect, and go be consistent inside the business. That is exactly what we need to do, right? But I think a lot of times people are like, man, you guys make it sound so simple, but I'm in an
It
organization.
is simple. It is simple,
Yeah,
right? But it's hard. Simple yet hard. I
yeah,
think that's the key thing, right?
yeah.
But
And like
yeah, but it's funny you mentioned all the things there, right? So we have that as our capability model for business partnering, and at the bottom of that you have your professional toolbox, right? So that's all the things you just mentioned. Those are the things we learn, and the rest we build on top, during our career, right? So I think that's beautifully laid out like that.
Yeah, and I mean that, that's just feeding off of you, man. Like I took these notes and I'm just like, and full transparency, when you talked about the leadership of yourself, right? I struggle with that. I struggle with that because like I'm gonna be my worst critic. Nobody's gonna motivate me more than myself. Like I'm gonna hold myself to the highest standard than anybody else ever will in their life. And what I start to understand is that creates a capacity constraint for what I can deliver, right? And I think like that people leadership side of it, and I want to go more into the people side of it now because I think we really opened that up. But the people side of our business is, I think, probably one of the biggest takeaways that I took away from the pandemic, if I'm being honest, right? When I looked and seen the difficulties a lot of organizations were facing with furloughs and closing down places and restaurants and like movie theaters, right? It really sparked in me this whole ideology around empathetic, data-driven decision making. And basically what that modeling framework is that you take in this listening, you take in this understanding, you take in this feedback, and you really diagnose that almost therapist like with the business, right? Then you take that information, you put that in your modeling, you put that in your assumptions, you put that in your planning, then you communicate that to the business and say, this is what we're going to do to ultimately make a decision, right? But typically before, it was like finance was like, running their budgets and here's the average run rate. This is what that's going to be, right? But when we think about the people side of what we do, because at the end of every day, at the end of every model we produce, at the end of every business decision we either accept or decline, it's always people. It's people. And the quicker as FP&A people can understand that your model is going to impact a person or a team or an individual, it changes what you're going into it with, right? Like you're going to have a little bit more like, I know if I go this recommendation to not do traveling for our marketing group, we may have some attrition issues because she's got talented, our CMO has talented people and they want to get going, right? And that's a whole nother aspect of it that typically finance don't understand. They're like, well, the travel budget is zero, so you can't really go. You don't think about what are all the collateral pieces on the people side that are going to happen. So when you think about FP&A's value proposition, when it comes to that empathy, that people side of the business, like what is the most important things for people to take away on that topic?
So I think you said it well yourself, Chris, right? But it's, at the end of any decision we make, there's a person doing something different, right? So if you don't understand the process from, let's say, decision to action and how to make people do the right thing, and we can always discuss what the right thing is, you're never going to get anything done, right? And that's why, too often when FP&A says it just got to be like this, it doesn't end up like that because no one follows it, right? Whatever business process it is. I think, now we're going to talk accounts payable, for instance, right? I saw another guy run a survey on a poll on LinkedIn. He asked, so why is it that accounts payable always goes wrong? And I think 55% said it's because the business doesn't follow the process. And I'm like, you know what? That might be the case, but either you haven't made it easy for them to do the right thing, or you haven't got a clue about how they're actually doing their job, right? It's not about them. It's about you. It's not about making it easy for you. It's about making it easy for the business to do the right thing. And if you do that, you know what? They'll do it. It's not rocket science again. It's not magic. It's just make it easy for people to do the right thing, and they will do it. And if you hit them in the head because they're 10% of our budget, they're not going to do the right thing. That's not how you're going to get the budget in line again. It's about talking, okay, so we are 10% above, that is what it is. But, what kind of value can we create from this? Let's try to look forward, right? Don't talk about, they know it. You're just stating the obvious, but you're just taking your dagger and just, stabbing it even further. They know it. So stop stating the obvious and start talking about how do we move on from here in the right way and doing the right things, making the right choices. That's what FP&A is about. And that's the people aspect, right? Because if you just look at the numbers and don't see people, you're never going to get anything done.
Man, I just wrote this down, and this is fire, dude. Don't make it easy for you. Make it easy for the business. I think that phrase is so powerful. And the reason why it's so powerful, because it talks about everything that we just talked about, right? It's putting the business before your day, right? Because at the end of the day, if you take accounting, finance, and just 10,000 level feet view, we're a support function to the business. We support the business, right? We're not the business, right? We're not the one closing contracts, bringing in revenue, closing bookings. We're the one, but I think changing it to say, how can, and this has been something from a people aspect that in leadership that I really strongly believe in is, I serve and support the entire business. And that's not just the leaders, right? That's not just the chief revenue officer I work with, or the marketing officer, or the COO, right? That is anybody in the business, right? And I think when you shift your mindset to not be the finance budget variance person, and you shift your mindset to say, I'm going to be a servant to the business, and I'm going to do everything I can within reason. Now, that's another aspect we need to talk about, right? A lot of times in the business, people are takers of finance and FP&A. When I mean by takers, do this analysis for me, do this. You constantly find yourself in this loop where you're just I'm overcommitted, right? And I've worked with sales leaders that are that way. And I've had to take a step back and say, look, I understand you want all these analysis. I understand you want all this stuff, but let's prioritize what's really important, because I've got other stakeholders and other capacity constraints that I need to support. And it's hard. And I'm telling everybody, and I'm telling you, I'm struggling with that right now, right? You have to be able sometimes to say no when no is not going to give you the best for that project, for that stakeholder. But at the same time, it's part of the, okay, I can't do this right now. Here's the other priority things that I have. Here's when we can focus and have time, energy, and effort on that. So even that prioritization on those people's side, it's a two-way street, because takers are always going to be takers, right? And if you're a giving person, givers are always going to think they can give. And takers are going to say, I want more, right? So it's a delicate balance. And to me, I think that balance is exactly what you talked about, right? Don't make it easy for you as accounting, finance, FP&A. Your focus should be serving to make it easy for the business.
No, absolutely. And never say no, say no but, right? I mean, there should always be a but, because then you can talk about, when can we work on these things? And as you said yourself, go back to the top 3 priorities of that stakeholder and say, is this analysis going to bring us closer to solving one of your key priorities? If yes, okay, let's look at it. If no, then, you shouldn't even be asking about this, right? I mean, you should also be focusing about these priorities. So make those priorities your North Star, and everything else will solve itself around it. I think that's, again, sounds simple, and it is. But, of course, it's always complex when you go out there.
Yeah, when you get into the trenches of it, and to the listeners and everybody that's going to look at that, it is. But from what we talked about, right, and I want to get into the summary aspect of it, right, like prioritization, getting outside your comfort zone, focusing on the people inside the business. And I think the last piece that we talked about a lot is you got to understand the business, not understand what drives DSO or what your revenue growth rate was, but like deeply understand the business. And to me, I think that has always been something that I've prided myself on. And to the other listeners is like, you got to do that. And listen, it's not going to be easy, right? It's not going to be, you just think you're going to flip on a light and you're going to be like, oh man, I got great business partnerships. Nah, man, those are forged in difficult situation. They're forged with a lot of work, but it's an investment for a higher ROI in the future. So Andres, one last question. When you think about, the future, and what is that like one to two things that if you were to give, 5 to 10 years from now for people to be focused on right now? I know we talked about business partnership. I know we talked about some of those elements I just mentioned, but like, where should people be like really, really banking their investment, their time, energy, and effort as they think about FP&A's value proposition in the future?
So, I mean, I think there are two key roles, right? There's the technology enablement and the people-driven aspect of FP&A. So the technology part, we cannot ignore that. We should use that. And I'm not saying we should all become techies. I have this expression that say we should become technos, right? So people that know what technology is available and how to apply it in our business. They won't know necessarily technically how to implement it unless it's a really plug and play tool down from the internet, but they know what's available and how to apply it, right? So they can bring the right people in to do that if they need a new tool or system. So become a techno, right? Because you need to know this. If you have no clue about what technology is out there, technology will, so to speak, drive you, and you don't want that, right? You want to be in control of the situation. And the second bit is, it's driven by people. So both inside of FP&A, right? Focus on what can we do to develop all these things we talked about earlier in the show to give them these skills that they need to be good business partners. What does it take today to start developing that? And we see many companies, also a lot more than 3, 5, 10 years ago, investing serious capital into developing the business partnership aspect of this people. So that's really gratifying to see that we are not just investing in tech anymore, we're also investing in people, and we need that, right? So focus on that people aspect, because if you don't, technology will just drive you.
Man, the first one, I like to be technos, like seriously, that is mind blowing, bro. I love that. Like, to be technology, not like you have to go in and here's what the design requirements are going to be, but be technological, be a techno, dude. That's amazing. And I mean, listen, man, being techno people practitioners, that's exactly what you just said, right? And I think like that is a fundamental, deeply changing value proposition that I think like you, others see inside the community. And one last thing for all the listeners, Andres, if they want to find out more about these things that we talked about today, where could they find you? What's your socials? How can they best connect with you on some of these things? Whether that's listeners, whether that's organizations, how can they best connect with you?
So, I mean, most of what I do is available on LinkedIn. So it's basically just to tap into that, go follow me, go subscribe to my newsletters. There's 2 articles or more coming out every week. So there's a ton of content coming out basically every day if you count everything. So go there and hit me up, and we'll figure it out from there.
Yeah, and to all the listeners, I highly recommend Business Partnership Institute. They're definitely thought leaders in the 4 key pillars: people, partnership, process, and partnership and platform. When it comes to anything from a content perspective, internationally across the globe, like Andres and his team at Business Partnership Institute, they do a tremendous job. So I would highly recommend that's my one-stop shop when I recommend and tell people where to go through to develop some of these skills and learn more. So I would definitely, all the listeners, make sure you go check them out at Business Partnership Institute. Andres, thank you so much for your time, man. I really appreciate it. I have a list of notes that I'm gonna hit you up, bro. So just be, maybe not today, but I'm gonna hit you up and be like, yo, man, how do we deep dive into this? Because I learned so much from you today. Thank you for your time. And to all the Collective Conversation listeners, this is another one. Make sure you check out the next one. Make sure to hit the like and subscribe on our YouTube channel. Share it. And Andres, thank you so much for your time. Thank you so much for your insight, man. And thank you.
Thanks for having me, Chris. It was a great time.
Awesome.